When I was a hitchhiker, I was going across the Sahara, and I felt like I was an ant crawling across this enormous landscape. And I thought if I could get up and fly over it, I could see it in a really new way. So I found that really exciting. And I thought, well, if the Sahara was cool, what about the Gobi? What about the Atacama? What about the Empty Quarter? And I just started doing one after the other, and I realized, well, hell, I want to photograph all of them. Mm-hmm. And it took me 15 years.
Welcome to the Viewfinders Photography Podcast. Hey there. My name's Graham Dargy. I'm a photographer based in Aberdeen, Scotland. And the tagline for this show is that we delve into the thoughts of some of the best photographers in the world. And today's guest, National Geographic veteran George Steinmetz, definitely fits the bill. I'll introduce George in a minute, but first, well, how are things? I hope you're well. Things are pretty good here. It's half term, so my daughter's off school for a few days. So we went to an aquarium in Macduff. We went to the Spectra Light Festival here in Aberdeen. We had a sleepover, one of our friends came over, ice skating, all the good family stuff, but not much time for work. So just want to let you know that the podcast will be on a short break for the next 2 or 3 weeks so I can catch up on some work and get ahead of some podcasting editing. I'll be back with the second half of the season featuring more brilliant guests, including Matt Kennedy, who just photographed the latest Spider-Man movie, and one of my favourite landscape photographers, Julia Redl from Germany. All that and more to come in the second half of this season, back in just a couple of weeks. In the meantime, why don't you check out some previous episodes with amazing photographers like Jim Richardson, Marcel Van Osten, Gregory Heisler, Valda Bailey, Magnus Lindbaum, Tim Clayton, Donna Kraus, and many, many more. You can connect with me on Instagram at Viewfinders Podcast, where you can see updates about the show, see what I'm getting up to, and you can find out about upcoming live events. Speaking of live events, segue, use the code VF10 to get 10% off tickets for the next Viewfinders live event. That's VF10, capital V, capital F10. What's Viewfinders Live? Viewfinders Live is a series of live online events that I run featuring some of my favourite guests from the show. You can join us on Zoom, where my guests give a behind-the-scenes look at their photography. You can ask anything in the live Q&A, and you might even win something in the exclusive prize draw. Viewfinders Live is a fun night in, where you can join a global audience to learn new photography skills and get up close with some of the best guests from the show. Upcoming speakers include food and advertising photographer Scott Coutinho and ICM seascape photographer Shona Perkins. By supporting the event, you'll also be making it possible for me to keep producing new episodes of the podcast. So go to viewfinderslive.com for all the information to get tickets and to use the code VF10 to save 10%. Okay, on with the show. This week, my guest is George Steinmetz, a documentary photographer based in New Jersey, who's shot more than 40 major photo essays for National Geographic. He's won 3 prizes from World Press Photo, the Environmental Vision Award from Pictures of the Year, a citation from the Overseas Press Club. He was named National Geographic's Adventurer of the Year in 2008, and he currently has over 1 million followers on Instagram. George is best known for his aerial photography, mainly using a motorised paraglider, which enables him to capture unique images of places inaccessible by traditional aircraft. His restless curiosity for the unknown drove him to hitchhike across Africa as a young man, and has been the drive behind his epic body of work, which covers remote landscapes, climate change, and global food supply. George's work has huge scope and scale, and our conversation touches on a few of George's long-term projects, how and why he got into aerial photography, and how he was almost shot with an arrow. It's a real privilege to have George on the show, and I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. Here's my conversation with George Steinmetz. George, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to meet with you today. I'm grateful for your time. I set aside time to prepare for these conversations, and I found myself so engrossed in your website, in the photography and the stories that go along with them. And it just took way more time than I thought it would. And I sort of felt like, wow, I should be like writing down my questions, but I'm just reading these stories from your photography. And so many strands I'd love to pick up with you today. So let's dive right in. You were born in California. Did you grow up there?
Yeah, I was born and raised actually it's kind of embarrassing, but in Beverly Hills, California.
Oh, wow, that's fancy.
It wasn't as fancy then as it is now, but you don't have any control over where you grow up. You just kind of you're there,
Yeah.
and but it was kind of when I was a kid, like I was still with the Boy Scouts and I rode my bike to school, and there was a pet shop and whatnot. But economically it just kept going and going, and I left when I went to college.
Okay. And so what kind of work were your parents in?
Well, my parents were divorced. My dad was in the lumber industry, and my mom, my parents were divorced, so was a single mother with four kids, and I don't know. She ended up by the time I graduated from high school, she was working for Stanford University, which is where I went to college.
Okay, great.
And,
Okay. And so what did you study in college?
I studied geophysics, and I didn't really use it very much. I was in my third year of college, and I was kind of panicked about having to actually go out and make a living doing something I wasn't so excited about. And so I decided to go on a big travel. And I wanted to go, life had been pretty easy for me growing up in Beverly Hills. And so I wanted to see a very different part of the world, get kind of as far away from, that life of, privilege as I could. And so I went on a long hitchhiking trip to Africa, and I didn't have much money. My parents refused to let me go, and I had to go with my own savings that I had from summer jobs. And I spent a year hitchhiking around Africa I think I lived for a year on $5,000.
Right.
And, it was kind of graduate school for me, like kind of growing up.
I wanted to pick up on your journey there, and I can imagine for a young guy from the States or any Western country, I guess, going on that kind of journey, it must have been, life-changing, obviously, is sort of the cliche word to go to, but tell me about that experience. How life-changing was that, and how did that sort of unfold for you when you got there?
I went there, I think, originally kind of to, in a way, as much to get away from my upbringing as it was to go and understand Africa. And then when I got there, I didn't really know much about the African continent. I didn't, when I started traveling, I had to learn French and then Swahili to get around. And I realized that there was so much to learn there that I didn't know or really understand any background in. So I became, it more from being a place I wanted to use to get away from Beverly Hills or California to a place I found fascinating and wanted to explore and understand more deeply. And I originally I grew up with looking at like National Geographic as a kid. And I thought it'd be cool to have a camera so I could take the kind of pictures that you saw in National Geographic. And this was, with film in 1979, and I'm 64 now, so it was a long time ago. And so I couldn't see what I liked the process of taking pictures, but I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and I couldn't see the results. So I took a lot of bad pictures, but I didn't know they were bad pictures till much later. But I love the process. I loved having a camera. It gave me an excuse to go and explore things. And I like that process.
So where did you start on that journey? Where did you land in Africa?
Well, I flew on Laker Airways from LA to Heathrow or Gatwick, and then I just started hitchhiking, and I went down through Italy, and I took the ferry from Sicily to Tunis, and then I started working my way across the Sahara through Algeria to Niger, I got into Chad during the Civil War, which was kind of crazy, and then through what was then called Zaire, now it's called Congo, and got across there to Rwanda and Tanzania, Kenya, and back up through Sudan to Egypt. And I didn't have much money, so I just had to hitchhike. And that was one of the rules. I learned like kind of 3 rules of hitchhiking is you don't pay for a ride, and you drink any water that comes out of a pipe,
Mm-hmm.
and then you just you sleep when it gets dark, and be friendly to people.
Mm-hmm. And it worked out well for you. It was safe and everything like that.
Well, you have some educational experience along the way, and you learn how to get along with everybody from you know nuns to arms smugglers. You have to get along with everybody,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was kind of a finishing school for me. And I'd say in college I had taken some classes in anthropology too, and I found it really interesting trying to understand the ways of traditional peoples there, how they made a living from the land,
Mm-hmm.
and I tried to document that with my camera.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I read on your website somewhere that one of the quotes that I've taken out is you have a restless curiosity for the unknown. Was that something that you had at that young stage, or I mean, that was something that helped you to drive that travel, to be curious, to ask questions, to find out about the new cultures and the new places and the new people that you were meeting?
Yeah, I think it was, I don't know, it was something I had in a really strong way. It just, I think maybe, I don't know if I was born with that, just it's how I am. And I remember I spent a lot of time looking at maps, and I had these wonderful Michelin maps of Africa, and I'd always be, they'd had like names of different like tribal groups, and they'd show where the roads are washed out in the wet season, and national parks and all these, strange places I knew nothing about. And I was really curious to go and see what they were like. And I started asking, try to find the most traditional peoples I could, try to understand their culture. Like I spent some time with pygmies
Mm-hmm.
in the Ituri forest, and it was really fascinating seeing how they made a living with basically with their wits and their feet and their hands.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating.
There's a photo of you on your website. You're a young man, and there's I don't know if this is the people that you're talking about. I think it's in Congo, and you've given this guy a smoke. I think as a picture of you and
Yeah.
the sort of tribal guy. It's just a really neat picture. So okay, so after that trip, um, you didn't want to get the real job, so to speak, and you had got this curiosity maybe about photography. How did you sort of become a photographer rather after that?
Well, I was a bit naive. I thought, I could go and do that, and I could like, take my pictures of National Geographic, and they give me a job. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't, I didn't really know what I didn't know. Um, and eventually, I did actually get a meeting at the Geographic, and I got some advice from somebody there. But I wasn't ready, and I went back to college. I graduated, and then went back to Africa again, and I used my portfolio from my year of travel to get some kind of little starter jobs. And anyway, I spent altogether spent 2.5 years hitchhiking around Africa, and when I came back, nobody, even in the States, would really give me any work because the work I had done was not really very relatable,
Mm-hmm.
and I needed to be more technically proficient. I didn't know how to work to get jobs in the U.S., especially back then with in the days of film. I had to know how to use artificial light, which I didn't really know. And so I came back, and I moved in with some friends from college, and I was really running out of money, and I started. I got a job as a photo assistant for a studio photographer, and started learning how to use big strobes, and then learn location lighting. And once I could do that, then I could start to get some work.
Mm-hmm.
Now with digital, a lot of people just use available light and fix it up with Photoshop. But then with film, like using Kodachrome 64 indoors, you would look like it was terrible. It was unusable unless you used artificial light, and you had to be really good at that so it didn't look artificial.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so working in a studio kind of thing, that's really different than the sort of photojournalism that you're known for. So how did you segue there?
Well, it was hard, but I didn't, you learn something from everything. And I worked as an assistant to a number of studio photographers in San Francisco. And a lot of what you learn technical things. You also learn what you don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And, I realized I didn't want to be a still life guy. I didn't really want to do advertising. It really wasn't suited for that kind of stuff. But I learned things, and actually some of the skills I learned it actually helped me out quite a bit later in life. I remember I was working for the studio photographer, and he had to photograph. He was a tabletop photographer. And he had to photograph like a dinnerware set, and he had to create this elaborate tent so that you realize you when you're photographing silverware, you don't really photograph the stuff you're photographing. It's the reflections off of it.
Yeah.
And some years later, I was working for the Geographic, and I had a story to photograph a robot, and the robot was all chrome, and I realized, oh, this is like silverware. I gotta create. I started creating this, built a huge tent that was like the size of a house around it with panels, because I was trying to light the reflections off the robot. And it's like, you learn stuff from that. And I learned, like, when you want to photograph something, I personally prefer to be like eye to eye with it. So, and you want lights that are the same size as your subject. So if you're photographing a car, you want like a really huge light. If you're photographing a mouse, you want a mouse size light. And you learn like kind of basic stuff. And so I was really, I learned my chops. It didn't take me very long. Like after a year or two of being a photo assistant, I was ready to, or I thought I was ready to go out on my own. But what I really loved, as you point out, Graham, I love being out in, in kind of frontier areas. And I like being in remote areas and trying to tell the story of those places.
So to bring it back to Geographic then, was that like something that was bugging you, that you wanted to shoot for them? I know, like in the beginning, there was maybe a naivety about that, saying, I'll shoot for National Geographic. But at some point, did it become like an ambition?
Well, it wasn't the ego of like, oh, I want to be a Nat Geo photographer. It was more like I wanted to do that kind of work. I didn't care really who was paying for it. I just wanted to go out and kind of explore the world and document it. And I loved seeing, back then there was, there was great stuff in Life magazine and a lot of places. And I wanted to go out and do photojournalism and kind of explore the world. And I started, my first jobs as a photographer were doing portraits. And I would, I got, I was working for local magazines, and I got a job to photograph like the local chef or the timpanist in the San Francisco Symphony. And you had to go and set up lights. I photographed a lot of people in Silicon Valley, like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. And I did that kind of stuff, like set up portraits. But I really preferred being out and doing kind of reportage.
I want to get into the aerial photography. So I was read that it was your African journey where you started to think about aerial photography. So when was the first time that you managed to get up in the air to do that? Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah, I came back from Africa, and I was when I was traveling in Africa, I was traveling a lot of trucks, and they put you're not paying for a ride, they put you on top of the truck. Okay. And usually it was an open cabin truck with like a pile with like, sacks of stuff, and usually people on top with your goats and everything. And you have to duck the trees as you're going down like jungle roads. Yeah. But I had to say, wouldn't it be really cool if I get up higher and I could like fly like a bird? I didn't want to fly like high, I wanted to fly like a bird. And but that stuck with me, because you when you get above, you can understand the geography a little bit better, differently. And so I was, when I came back to San Francisco, I was trying to build up my portfolio, and I decided I wanted to do a story on sheep ranching in Nevada. And I went out and I found a guy at the local airport who would take me up for if I get paid for the fuel for his Cessna. Okay. And it was just wonderful. Like, I still have that photo. I took it out the window of a Cessna, but looking down on agriculture in Nevada, and just, you get up and it's like, whoa, it's like you're like flying over the map. And it was really exciting. And most magazines don't really use that kind of photography, but I found it really captivating. And when I started working for the Geographic and magazines that use it, that was usually my favorite part of the assignment, was the flying.
And so was your first aerial Geographic story, was that African air? Was that right? No, I took, there's an old saying that as a journalist, you write about what you know, or you photograph what you know. And my first story for the Geographic was about oil exploration, how oil is found. And basically, it was about what I studied in college. I studied geophysics. And when I was a student, I got some summer jobs working for oil companies. I worked for Texas Coast Alaska Division, and I worked for a seismic exploration crew in Mexico. And I would spend time talking to these guys. They tell me these tall tales about, when I was in Kuwait, the rig blew up, and they would tell you all these stories about stuff. Yeah. And so I heard all these stories, and so I pitched the story to the Geographic about how oil is found.
And this is when oil was really expensive, and because people don't really know, they think it just like squirts out of the ground, or they thought at the time. And so that's what my story was for them. And I started going around the world, and I actually had a great time. I got to New Guinea and Sumatra, where they were doing a lot of helicopter operations for oil. And that was really fun to go out, especially when somebody else is paying for the chopper time. It was really fun.
Okay, did that project take you to Aberdeen as well?
Yeah, I was working on oil. I wanted to. I'd heard all these stories about crazy oil situations, and I wanted to photograph offshore oil. And I wanted to go out, and I found these seismic boats that were going out, and went out. I wanted to go out in a really bad weather. I thought that'd be really dramatic, because usually they just kind of drive around the ocean back and forth like a big lawnmower, and it's kind of boring. So I thought, well, where would be the most interesting area? The North Sea. They got really nasty weather. So I went up there in February, and sure enough, we got stuck in a force 10 storm. It was crazy.
Right.
So I wanted to find like the nastiest weather find.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're probably in the right place. Everybody here, anyway, in Aberdeen works in the oil industry. I mean, most people. Everybody is a geophysicist or an engineer or something, and it's an amazing industry. Me being on the outside of it, I don't really know much about it, but it's interesting that you've got that oil industry link, because in Aberdeen it's really it's like the only game in town, So
well, Graham, like the oil industry, it's the oil guys are kind of secretive. Like you talk to the exploration guys, and they really don't. They really keep their mouths shut, because they don't want you to, like, they find some really big find, and they want everybody to know where it is, because there's like hundreds of millions of dollars in line. So it was really helpful for me when I started working that story. I could talk oil, and I could make these guys feel comfortable.
Right.
And I knew what they didn't want me to know. I didn't know. So I said, look, I don't want to see your maps. I don't need that. I just want to see, your doodle buggies. And they go, oh, cool. You can see the doodle buggies. And that was the picture. What was secret for them wasn't really visually interesting. And so I could use that to make them comfortable.
Okay, I wanted to talk about your project, Desert Air, because you describe that on your website as an obsessive project. And can you talk about that one? I was wondering if it segued off of any other project that you'd done before, how one thing had led to another, and maybe just tell us a little bit about that project, Desert Air.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I was a hitchhiker, I was going across the Sahara, and I realized I felt like I was an ant crawling across this enormous landscape. And I thought if I could get up and fly over it, I could see it in a really new way. I could kind of understand the geography. And so after I had done a couple stories for the Geographic, and I thought they would kind of trust me to propose my own thing, a big project, I pitched a story on the Sahara. And I had been down there on another project, and I'd met a pilot who said he could take me around in an ultralight. He had a kind of motorized hang glider, and so I talked the Geographic into doing that. The idea was we could put the little hang glider in the back of a pickup truck, and we could just drive it around in the Sahara. When we wanted to fly, we just take it off the pickup and take off from the sand. Anyway, and the guy, I got the money from the magazine, and the guy flaked out on me. He had another job that he couldn't help me, and so I had to learn how to fly myself. Because in Niger there was really nobody else to hire, and in Chad there were no helicopters except for the French military, and so I had to do your own, and so I learned how to fly. I got into motorized paragliding for that project. I started taking classes and training, and I bought my own gear, and I went to the Sahara, and I started. I did this a story in the Central Sahara, and I did 2 big trips with the glider. And the motorized paraglider, it's the very unusual aircraft. It's the lightest, slowest motorized aircraft in the world. There's no fuselage or no wheels. It's a strap-on motor like a big leaf blower, and the wing is a paraglider, so you run to take off and land. And it opened up new ways of seeing for me in desert environments, because there was unobstructed view, 180 degrees horizontal and vertical. So it was like a flying lawn chair. And so I started flying that, and it was just really excited about what I was seeing, how I was able to see remote places. And I decided I wanted to go to more deserts, and I did that for 15 years.
Mm-hmm. So the Sahara sort of project, it grew out to be just deserts all over the place.
Yeah, it's kind of like I felt kind of like I had like somebody handed me a football, and I had a big opening, and I just wanted to keep on running. I was seeing stuff that like nobody had really seen. I could fly in places nobody had ever flown before, and seeing, and it wasn't like bragging rights. It was like I was seeing stuff that was really cool that you couldn't get access to any other way. And so I find that really exciting. And I thought, well, if the Sahara was cool, what about the Gobi? What about the Atacama? What about the empty quarter? And I just started doing one after the other, and I realized, well, hell, I want to photograph all of them. And it took me 15 years.
It's quite interesting. I'm sure people must say this to you, but you would think desert, there's nothing there, but that's not what you found. I read somewhere that you discovered the highly developed strategies that allow man, vegetation, and wildlife to endure on the outer limits of survival. Can you unpack that a little bit and talk about what you really found in the desert from that angle?
Well, I mean, when you're flying, it's on remote areas like that. I was interested in hyper arid environments where there's virtually no vegetation, and it looks like the earth with its living skin peeled away. And you do find wildlife out there, but it's like I said, like you pointed, it's at the very edge of what's possible. And the oases are kind of like they're kind of like the inversion. They're kind of like islands out in the Pacific. It's just these little oases, and you find it's really interesting how people and animals have adapted to the environment. And it's like these desert environments. It's like the earth with its living skin stripped away, and everything is very raw and apparent. And from the air, there's nowhere to hide. You can see everything. It's just really beautiful. And you see it. I mean, you see that played out in all these different cultures. Because I found, for me, deserts, it was like a disparate family that was, like people separated at birth, and you would find similar like shapes and forms in different deserts, but they would all be unified by aridity. And you find salt, but you find deserts in everywhere from the Sahara to Antarctica to the Andes and the Himalaya. But you start looking at them, and you find, they're doing the same, similar kinds of water conservation, the same forms of bark dunes, the same wind erosion, the same issues.
That's really interesting how things are sort of connected in that way, isn't it? Things that would seem disparate like that. When you got into the using the paraglider, then what was the sort of learning curve for that? Because the way you've described it, it sounded like you were really dropped in the deep end there, and you just had to kind of get on with it. I can imagine nowadays you probably need to do some training and get some kind of license. I don't know, but there you were just had to get on the thing and fly up. Did it come to you quite easily? And how do you manage the camera when you're up there? I would have dropped it, obviously. How were just the sort of logistics of that process for you?
Well, in the U.S. where I was doing my training, there was it's kind of unregulated. There's no license or required or available. The FAA's attitude is, you want to go kill yourself, just don't take anybody with you. So you're not allowed to fly over populated areas, and you have to be careful. And so you start asking around, and I talked to some people before I got into it. I talked to people about it who had done it, and they told me that it was reasonable if you only flew really early in the morning and really late in the day. Because in the middle of the day you can get big there could be big bubbles of hot air, and you get like dust devils and turbulence, and that can cause the wing to collapse, which can be fatal. But if you fly really early and really late in the day and you take certain precautions, it's safe. It's kind of like rock climbing. If you clip into solid rock and you check your knots, it's okay. And I only wanted to fly early in the morning and late in the day, so I said, well, that's reasonable for what I want to do. Because early in the morning and late in the day, that's only when you have really nice light. So you just start kind of, and then you hunt around trying to find like somebody who's a good instructor. And I got into paragliding when I was about 40, which is good because it's not the safest sport, but when you're older, I think you're a little bit more cautious. It's like I don't want to give a 17-year-old a motorcycle, and you get into it when you're 40, and you're going to be a little bit, you're better at risk management. So I just, I started taking classes and buying the stuff, and I just, you figure it out, but you have to be careful because there's no manual.
Yeah.
And I was flying in a lot of, when I was doing the deserts, Graham, I flew in a lot of really weird areas where nobody ever flown a paraglider before. So there was really nobody to ask. We had to go and look at stuff and think it out really carefully. I always did my flying with another person who was a more proficient pilot than me.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like you go, if you were diving in, hazard environment, like say like under ice or shark infested water or something, you'd want to have a pro diver with you, who could kind of watch your back and help you figure out safety issues. So that's what I did. I took a pro pilot with me every time.
Just on the scale or craft of photojournalism, I was wondering, how do you tell a story? What do you look for as an photography wise to start telling a story? Because I wanted to ask you about Feed the Planet, or even the Desert Air project. It's if you're going to say, okay, the project is deserts. It's so broad. What would you look for a starter point to really get some traction and get into the story? Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, basically, you want to. I like to see things that nobody else has seen, and you want to show people something new. And I have a voracious appetite for pictures, and I've seen a lot of stuff. And he's like, I want to see stuff that what haven't you seen? And so with the deserts, that's what I really loved about the gliders. It let me go and fly in areas that were just gorgeous, but especially from the air, and no one had ever seen it like that way before. And that was, I used to love being like on an airline and looking at the person next to you opening a magazine, like when they actually open magazines, and look, and you'd see, like, sometimes there'd be like a magazine with my pictures in it, and I wouldn't say anything. I just watch them, and you saw if you got more of their attention than the picture before or after, and you want to, like, wow, look at that, Martha, that's really cool, and that, to me, that's that's what the story is. And it's the same thing with deserts as it is now. I'm working on food. I like photographing really large scale food situations, stuff that most people consider kind of freaky because they haven't seen it before. And so I went, like in China, got into the biggest pig slaughterhouse in the world. And it's like, whoa, you ever seen, I mean, there were like 1,200 people on the cutting room floor. It was crazy size. And I like to see stuff, nobody's seen. And so it's the same curiosity and, show the hidden world.
Yeah, it's that curiosity that's still driving you. So, okay, on the Feed the Planet project, I found this so interesting. And like you say, most people haven't seen these places, or, I mean, we know our food comes from somewhere, but we don't necessarily want to see the process that it goes through, I think. And some of the photographs in the project, they really confront you with the realities of those processes, and they can be quite uncomfortable. Tell us, maybe give us an overview of the project, and then we'll get into it from there. A little overview of the Feed the Planet project.
Well, I got started when I've been doing a lot of flying, and I was kind of finishing up with deserts, and an editor at the Geographic asked me if I'd be interested in working on a project about it was called feeding 9 billion. They estimated that by 2050 we'd have 9 billion people on the planet, and how are we going to feed all these people? And he thought with my aerial chops that I'd be able to visualize that in a different way. And I told him I thought it'd be interesting, but it'll be only interesting if you were to look at the mega farms, like the freaky farms, because like a cow under a tree is not very interesting, but you see, like a mega feedlot or something, that would be, more interesting. Mm-hmm. And so he agreed to that idea. And so also the nice thing about seeing lots of something is you get an idea of feeding 9 billion, it communicates that. And so the first place he sent me was out to Kansas to photograph the wheat harvest. And I started looking for the biggest wheat farmer in Kansas because I like scale. And I found this guy, was a really nice guy, and he had a small plane for flying around his fields and seeing when they're ripe. And I went up on his plane. We went over a cattle feedlot, and I go, "Oh, that's really cool! Look at all those cows." And we went over a cattle feedlot where they had dairy cows, so they were like white cows against all the brown poo in the feedlot. So they stood out really well. Mm-hmm. And I went back there the next day to try and fly with my paraglider because I wanted to get down lower and slower, and I got thrown in the county jail for criminal trespassing.
Wow.
And I thought it was really weird. I mean, when I landed, the sheriff's, was kind of hot and bothered, and I showed him my Nat Geo ID and gave him, he wanted my editor's phone number, and I was very, transparent with this guy, and they said they were throwing me in jail because they were concerned about agro security.
Okay.
Agro security. I was worried about my own security. I thought I might my motor quit and I get stomped by the cattles, and then it dawned on me that there are elements of our food supply that some of the larger producers don't want us to see.
Okay.
And, if you're a journalist and you're interviewing somebody and all of a sudden they get all nervous about something, well, that's your question. You hit on something interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like with the deserts, I wanted, if it hadn't been seen, it's like, well, I realized a lot of parts of our food supply haven't really been seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like, as a consumer, we have, maybe not a legal right, I think we have a moral right to be able to see, or a natural right to see where our food comes from. Mm-hmm. And so I started looking a little more intently at that. And that was 8 years ago. And so that guy, that farmer, that rancher in Kansas, he did me a great service by getting me thrown in jail.
Yeah. So did you have difficulty getting access to some of these places then, or for that reason, or does National Geographic just open all doors?
No, people have this idea that, you work for National Geographic and all of a sudden it's like everything you're on, everything's great. And I used to have the magazine and look at these pictures like, taken out of like the window of a helicopter. Like, oh man, if I was in that helicopter, I could have taken a better picture than that. Well, The problem was I wasn't in the freaking helicopter. I didn't know where to get the helicopter. I couldn't have got the assignment. I didn't know where to put it. And so it's all for the Geographic, I mean, basically they'll let me use their name and their letterhead to write a letter to get into a place. But I've got to craft that letter. I got to figure out what's important and do all the rest of it, which is the main part of the work. Mm-hmm. And so I love the Geographic, but it's been kind of a grant giving organization for me, but I'm still driving the bus. Mm-hmm. And because when, on a project like the kind of projects I do, they just are basically signing the check and giving me a long leash.
Mm-hmm. So some of the photographs and some of the facilities that you get to on this project and this sort of industrial scale of the agriculture, like I said before, it's a little bit shocking sometimes to see it. And you described a place you were in earlier as well. What have been the takeaways for you from this project, from seeing that huge scale of agriculture? Has it challenged you in any way? Has it impacted you in any way, I guess, is what I'm trying to get to.
Well, it can be kind of, we're fed all this kind of propaganda about where our about food, like, you buy, you buy like the butter and it shows like, the happy cow in the green pasture with a little fence behind. Mm-hmm. And we have these kind of idealized views, and a lot of that is actually put forward by the food industry. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, false marketing. It's kind of like, if you buy these pantyhose, you look like Kim Kardashian, and that's really not the case. Mm-hmm. And so, but when you go and you see these places, sometimes, it is kind of disheartening. I mean, like in the morning I have, there's this kind of Greek yogurt I get, and I've been to their factory in Idaho, and the place, it looks like, it's massive, and it's all these machines of stainless steel. And I feel sometimes I'm like this little gerbil, like sucking on a silver tube coming out of this big agro-business machine. But that is, if you want to feed 9 or 10 billion people, you want to do that as efficiently as possible. And so, people think a lot of these animal operations are inhumane, like, these chicken houses where the chickens are all crammed in these little cages. But if you want to feed 9 or 10 billion people and you still want to have some wilderness left, you want to really minimize the agricultural footprint. And you don't, if everybody, to put it another way, if everybody eats organic, we're screwed. There's not enough land and water, because organic food takes a lot more land and water generally. Okay. And so I see that it's complicated, that, and if you eat like, conventionally raised poultry, that's actually in some ways better for the environment. I wouldn't want to be that chicken, but it's actually better for the environment. because it conserves more resources.
Mm-hmm. So it's
So it's
complicated.
complicated.
Yeah.
The other thing that's kind of tricky for me is I have to go up to the owner of, like, the $4 million chicken ranch and talk my way into that place.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to publish picture. When I publish pictures, I don't want him to feel like that guy ripped me off. That guy, that guy lied to me. And I want to be transparent, and I want to give a fair shake. I want to explain what they're doing so that people can make up their own mind on what they want to do. And so if I'm doing my job right, the chicken farmer should be happy that he looks right, and the people who are animal rights activists should be all pissed off, and everybody should be able to, you just want to present the information and let people draw their own conclusion.
I wanted to bounce from there to something completely different, which I dug into your website and found that you'd photographed the tree people of Papua New Guinea, which kind of seems like the opposite of what we've just been talking about, where it's like the definition of off-grid living there, living in the forest. I imagine that was quite a daunting thing to do, because from what I could gather, they're a culture who actively don't want to make contact with outsiders. I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about that project. It seemed really interesting to me.
Yeah. I was working in New Guinea, and I was in Indonesian New Guinea, and it's the Indonesian half of the island. And the people there were, a lot of people there were, most of the people there weren't contacted by the outside world until after World War II, especially up in the highlands. Mm-hmm. And you have a lot of people there who are still, like, living largely without clothes, or not what we would consider clothes in the West. Mm-hmm. And they don't really have many inputs from the outside. And I heard that there was a group of people that was still uncontacted, and they were living in trees. And I didn't believe it. I thought it was bullshit. Mm-hmm. But I asked a lot of people, and people who actually been there, it seemed like it was real. Mm-hmm. And so I went down there to check it out, and we went into the forest, and like the third or fourth they were there, these guys came running out of the forest and tried to kill me. They had never seen anybody with clothes on. Mm-hmm. And they had these special arrows just for people, and they were pointing them at me. Right. And it was very real. Yeah. And so I realized that it was really a important story, and not just a story. I thought it was important thing to document, because it was clear to me, looking at the rest of New Guinea, that sooner or later these people were going to come into contact with the outside world, whether they wanted to or not. And I thought it was important to make as accurate and sensitive a record of their way of life as I could before it disappeared. Because I look in the United States and you see what's happened to all the Native American groups and stuff. I knew that it was inevitable they would be contacted, and so I started asking around, and I wanted to find somebody who could act as an intermediary with them. And I found a missionary. I heard about a missionary who was the only outsider to have spoken the language, and he went there to basically translate the Bible into their language. He went through there's a missionary linguistic group that he was working with, and so I went and I saw him, and I convinced him to come back to New Guinea with me and do a more serious expedition, so we could go really deep and find people and document people who had never been contacted. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we did. And it was a really difficult and fascinating experience.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you were able to make an accurate sort of documentation of their way of life without intruding and that kind of thing?
Yes and no. I mean, there's a theory. It's a theory in particle physics. It's called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, that you don't really that you can't really document a thing. You can just document your effect upon it. That's kind of paraphrasing, but it's kind of like with particle physics. You try to look at like these, little molecular bits. You bombard them with things, and you see what happens. Like you throw a bomb in there and see what runs out. and basically that's kind of what we're doing with these people. I mean, you the fact that you're there means they're no longer uncontacted, but you try to go in and be as sensitive as you can and try to say, like, well, what are you guys doing tomorrow? And they say, what do you mean, what are we doing? You're here. I mean, like, it's kind of like you're a Martian in their house. All they want to do is look at you because you're the weirdest thing they've ever seen.
Sure.
And say,
Okay.
okay, but if we weren't here, like, what are we doing? I don't know. I don't know. We'd just be sitting around smoking. You're like, well, okay, then, do you guys, what do you guys do for food? He said, well, we eat fish. Okay, can you show me how you fish? Oh, sure. And they go out and then they go out fishing and they kind of, it's such a routine for them that they do it their normal way.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, okay, well, you guys are really good at tree climbing. Do you get any food from the trees? Oh, yeah, we get honey from the trees. Oh, well, are there any beehives around? Sure, there's a beehive over here. And so I had a guy with me who was, I brought a guy with me who was an expert in trees because I realized to photograph the tree people, I would have to be up on their level. And so I need to be able to photograph them up in the trees. And so I brought a guy with me who was a expert in doing rope work in trees. So I could suspend myself up 100 feet off the deck in the trees.
Mm-hmm.
And so I set up a rig so I could be up next to the beehive and then photograph them coming up to where I was and document their way of life.
Must have been a completely fascinating experience. I'm going to move on to talk about other things in a second, but I would just wonder, you've traveled so much, you've seen so much, many things that other people would never see with their own eyes. What's your sort of takeaway from that? What have you learned along the way? If you could encapsulate that in a short paragraph.
Well, I mean, Grant, the whole world is fascinating. It's kind of how you look at it, and my advice to photographers is to go and photograph what they know and show that in a way that they, with their unique perspective, that they can to others. I mean, I remember once I had an assignment to photograph my hometown of Beverly Hills, and I decided that it'd be interesting to photograph a maid's perspective on Beverly Hills. Mm-hmm. And you were thinking of all the rich people. It's like, no, but what's it like being a maid in Beverly Hills? So it was really hard, but I actually found an old friend who would let me photograph their maid's life and follow the maid around. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting because I just realized that the maid was like the best friend for the kids. The mom was off on her beauty appointments and the dad was off making shitloads of money. Mm-hmm. And the kids were helping the maid vacuum their bedroom, and they're having a great time. They're playing vacuum and they're having a great time. And that was really the untold story of Beverly Hills. So you photograph what you know. Mm-hmm. That's the advice I have for people.
Yeah, that's a great way. And do you become confident in finding your own angle like that? And looking for your own narrative or your own spin to put on a story like that?
Yeah, you basically have to follow your gut and what's interesting. And to me, it's always like, what's the picture I haven't seen. And I mean, now I do a lot of flying. Now, a lot of what I do is looking at like Google Earth, trying to find interesting situations that I can go and, translate with my drone at a particular time of year and get a picture of something that no one's seen. So, but it's constantly looking for the new and the interesting.
Let's take a minute to talk about gear then, camera gear. So, okay, I usually ask what's your go-to camera and lens combination. I understand you'll be using different things for different things, but what's comfortable for you? What is a good thing to have in your hand?
Well, my work has evolved. I mean, I used to use all fixed focal length lenses when I was using film, and I had the fastest focal length lens in basically every lens that Nikon made, from like 15 up to 300. Mm-hmm. And when I started doing a lot of flying, I switched to zooms because it was difficult to change lenses while I was flying. Mm-hmm. I didn't have any place to put anything. And so now as I shifted to digital, like 2004, continue to use zooms. My main camera now is the Canon R series, mm-hmm. which is an incredible camera, the mirrorless camera, mm-hmm. The R5. And the lenses we're in a fantasy time for photography, and what you can do now is stuff I couldn't have dreamed of, 40 years ago. It's incredible. Even the stuff I can do with my R series now, I couldn't have imagined I could do even like 2 years ago. The stuff just keeps getting better and better. Mm-hmm. But I find most of what I need to do, I can do with like a 24 to 70. It's like a 24 to 100 zoom. Like that's kind of my go-to lens, that wide angle lens.
I'm using Nikon SLR still, but I've used a friend's Canon R something, and I found the autofocus was incredible. Are those the kind of advancements that you're talking about, or what's it really doing for you?
No, I mean, autofocus has gotten really good. I mean, but what's more impressive to me is that you can, when you're looking through the mirrorless systems, you're seeing your exposure before you take the picture. You're seeing, you can shoot in the dark because you're looking at the sensor. You're not looking through the prism. And so, you can be photoing virtually in like complete darkness and you can see what's going on. It's like night vision. I found the stabilization is incredible. I was in India last month in a Sikh temple where they were feeding like 1,000 people on the floor, and it was really this chaotic scene. And I wanted to make it visually the picture work. I wanted to have a slow shutter speed to have like some people still and some blurred. And I found I could, with the handheld system, I could hand hold it at like, I have to look at the specs, but I could hand hold it like, like an eighth of a second. Right. And I could get some people sharp, and then the servers were all blurred because it was a situation where I couldn't set up a tripod. It was too chaotic, so I could hand hold it like a quarter of a second, and it was incredible. I found another situation over there where I was shooting in the dark. It was they were drying fish by candlelight, and there was no way to use a tripod. I was setting up in this rickety thing, and I could hand hold a picture at a quarter of a second, an ISO 3000. And it was sharp, and it looks good big. It was like, it's just incredible what you can do. The drones now, I can do like, a drone photo at a half second and it's sharp. I mean, do you know what to think about flying in a helicopter or a paraglider and shoot with a half a second? It's like, it's crazy.
Yeah. And I was about to ask about the drones that you're using. Can you go into some detail about that?
Well, I use DJI drones. DJI is kind of, they dominate the marketplace for drones, and I keep getting every year or two they come out something new, and I try and get the new one as soon as I can because it's always better than the last one. And my preferred platform is it's a system called the Inspire 2, and it's kind of expensive and it's big, but it's got the biggest sensor I can find on a reasonably portable drone. And I also use the little ones like the Mavics are really great with their the Hasselblad lenses. Their resolution is not quite as good, but they fly extremely well, and you can use them indoors and you can use them close to people because they're not. It's kind of like the Inspire 2 it's big. It's kind of intimidating, but the Mavic it's relatively small, so you can photograph within 10 feet of people, and it's okay. They don't really mind so much.
Okay. Are you finding it easier to use the drones than obviously to get up in the paraglider? Obviously it's easier, but is it a better experience for you photographically? Are you getting a better outcome? I think that's what I'm getting at. Well,
it's very different. I mean, there's I definitely miss the experience of being up there and being able, not just kind of, I'm not out of kind of, I'm not like some macho adventure dude. Basically, I want to say that earlier on too. Like I only fly for pictures. I don't go out and fly to get my rocks off.
Okay.
I'm kind of like a surfer with a camera and no camera, no surfing. But now with the drone, I mean, it's I find when you're up in the air, it's one of those you can really explore. Like with the paraglider, I could fly for 2 hours and I can fly at 30 miles an hour, so I can really explore remote areas. With the drone, you can't. It's like a dog on a long leash, and maybe you can go a couple miles sometimes, but all you get to see is what's in this little screen in front of you. It's kind of like you're driving around with blinders on or a really bad scuba mask. It's all you can see is what's in front of you. There can be something really cool around you and you have no idea what's going on. And I don't know how many times I went out flying with the paraglider and I went up with one idea and that idea ends up not being any good. And you find something really cool that you didn't expect because you got like peripheral vision. You go, oh, look, there's a gazelle, came out of there. Oh, let's go over the follow the gazelle. Yeah. And with the drone, you just have no situational awareness, but the drone, you can wait for things. You can be stable. You can go, oh, I want to be a little left, a little right. You go up. With the conventional aircraft, even a helicopter, they're always moving. I mean, helicopter pilots do not like to hover. They like to keep moving. And so with the drone, I can fly. I can take aerial photos from 20 feet, 50 feet, and it's okay. And I can take off and, I've taken off from the boat in the middle of the ocean from a canoe. So it just opens up all kinds of new places. And when I got into paragliding, I was flying out in the middle of the freaking Sahara and there was nobody around for 100 miles. But now with the drones, I can take off in, the middle of a Sikh temple I can just
Mhm.
set it up. It's okay. You
Mhm.
launch from their hand. I don't like to do that, but you get it up it goes. So
Yeah.
it's fantasy time for cameras.
If you've got a minute, George, this is a round called double exposure. Okay. And I'm going to ask you about one of your photos that has particularly caught my eye. And then I'll throw it back to you to tell me about a particular story, experience that you've had in your photography journey. And I'd looked out a few of your pictures. One that there's this one in Lanzarote, which just looks really interesting to me. And then there's the shark head one. But I think I prefer the Lanzarote picture, but I need to ask you about the shark heads because it's such a weird and eerie picture. Can you maybe describe that and tell us about that image?
Oh, well, I've been, as part of my project on food, I wanted to look at global fisheries, and some fisheries experts advised me to go to Mauritania in West Africa. It's a desert nation with a very productive fishery, and I went to a port in the far north called Nouadhibou, and it's the only deep water port in the country, and a lot of the boats come in there. And some of the experts I talked to advised me to go and check out the place where like the local, not the big boats, but the local guys come in, and they have this kind of place where they put fish up to dry, all the kind of the bycatch and the nasty stuff comes out of the bottom of the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And one area they had where they were chopping up sharks, and they had all these baby shark heads, and they put them up to dry. Apparently, it's a popular soup in Nigeria, shark head soup. And so these are baby sharks. I mean, the shark heads were kind of like as big as your computer mouse. The shark heads, and they cut all their heads off and they put them out to dry. And the way they did it, they'll do them on their back, and so it's like they look like these kind of like sad pumpkins, these like white sad pumpkins with these kind of like curved mouths all pointing down. It's kind of spooky, it's kind of Halloweenish.
Yeah,
It's kind of freaky stuff. But when I go when I go to a location, I usually do a lot of homework and ask a lot of questions. And I knew this area to go. And they didn't tell me to go look for the unhappy shark heads, but they just told me to go look. There's a lot of sharks in that fishery, and so you want to be informed when you go out.
Yeah, it's research must be a big part of what you do.
I think research is really key, and I think I see a lot of people who think they have a great visual eye, but as a storyteller, you have to really know your story before you start telling it. And research is key. I spend about a third of my time out in the field, but 2/3 is at home, and a lot of that's doing research. And you have to find, it's not just like Google searching. You got to call people who know stuff, who can, you want to find stuff that's not out there. So you have to talk to a lot of people and find the people to talk to.
Let me bounce it back to you then, George. It must be difficult, but I wonder if there's a particular moment, image, anecdote, experience you've had along the way that it just has a great story attached to it.
My favorite pictures are usually the ones that I had kind of the most skin in the game, that was the most difficult to do. And I don't know. In aerial photos, there are some things I did when I was flying where I took risks that I wouldn't want to take every day to get a picture. And I'm here to tell the story, so I got away with it. But those are the ones that I appreciate the most because I know how much went into them. But even for me, the story, the backstory of getting arrested in Kansas, that's what launched me in my 8-year project, and that's one of the most important pictures I took in terms of it changed the course of what I was doing for the past decade.
Cool. Okay. I'll put a link to that picture in the show notes so people can check it out. Okay, last round to bring us home. This is a quick fire round. So I've got 8 quick questions if you're up for that.
Sure.
Okay, wide angle or telephoto?
Wide angle.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Okay, expensive lens cloth or just the corner of your shirt?
Corner of my shirt.
Okay, like all the best photographers give me that answer. Do you have like one emoji that's just your go-to emoji?
Yeah, it's usually the kid like what the WTF emoji, like your hands up. I don't know what to do.
Okay, yeah, that's my one. It's got all kinds of uses. So You can apply it on almost any message. I wondered, what is the most unexpectedly brilliant place that you've traveled to?
Unexpectedly brilliant. Lanzarote was pretty unexpectedly brilliant for me. Yeah, I like, you find weird places. Often, like, remote islands have really good stuff on them.
Mm-hmm. And what was there? Was it the volcanic sort of landscape? I think is pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the way they farm in Lanzarote. They have this form of pit agriculture that was really visually from the air was really beautiful. It looked kind of like a black egg crate with grapes in the hollows. It was really beautiful.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask you about that one. I'll put a link to that picture in the show notes. What's a weird thing I could find in your camera bag?
Toothpicks.
Oh, okay. Is it for picking your teeth, or is there a photographic
I got these space teeth, so I got to pick them all the time. I mean, it's other weird stuff. I mean, I keep my camera bag pretty clean. There's just not a lot. I don't bring a lot of gadgets. It's you always have extra batteries and extra memory card, and that's about it.
Okay.
Keep it clean.
Yeah, nothing that doesn't need to be in there. Name a photographer that we should all know about. We should all go check out.
Somebody comes to mind is really interesting. I spent a lot of time in India recently, so I've been thinking a lot about Mary Ellen Mark. Really extraordinary photographer.
Mary Ellen Mark. Yep, I get you. Okay. Link in the show notes. One of the greats. And when do you feel at peace with the universe?
When I'm sleeping.
Cool. Okay. I can relate to that for sure. I want to thank you for your time, George. It's so fascinating. And I think, like I said at the start, I was a bit overwhelmed in knowing where to go on this. And I think we've managed to touch on a few interesting things there. So thank you so much for your time, and all the best.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Follow George on Instagram, and I highly recommend delving into his website. It's so interesting. You can check out his books, which are linked in the show notes as well. Remember, you can use the code VF10 to save money on your ticket for the next Viewfinders Live event. And if you like this episode, then check out my conversations with Jim Richardson and Robin Moore. Have a great week. Take care, and I'll see you soon.